Good evening, Professor Treaster. We are here in Budapest for a water conference, and I would like to, if you would like to introduce yourself briefly. You have a very extensive career. We'd like to hear a bit about it, and.
Well, I'm glad to be here. We've just had a very interesting panel discussion on journalism and climate change, brought together here by the European Journalism Center in Maastricht. Lots of journalists from around Europe. I, for many years, was a reporter and foreign correspondent for the New York Times. I joined the University of Miami with an endowed chair as a professor. And I write a column for the magazine that I edit, which is OneWater.org, University of Miami's online magazine for the environment. My column is published on Huffington Post and All Voices and other internet outlets. The subject for our magazine, as you can see from its name, is water. We use water as a jumping-off point to talk about the global environment. And our reporting is from all over the world: Africa, Latin America, China, Europe. We are being read in 60 or so countries, and our approach to the environmental subject is to tell that story through people, and we specialize in strong narrative reporting. We think that people will want to read our stories because they're well written, they're interesting and exciting literature, and they happen to be about the environment. So there is a sense that if you focus tightly on a policy issue like science or like the environment, that you may exclude some readers if it becomes tensely focused on that theme. So what we try to do is get across these important issues, but we tell it in a personal, humanized way. So we'll tell you about difficulties a woman in East Africa may be having in getting water for her family. Or we'll talk about the woman who has to walk 4 hours a day to get her water supply. Or the woman who went to the hospital to have a baby, listening to the government's advice that having delivery by midwife is dangerous. She then went to the hospital and found that she nearly died and her child nearly died. And the reason was that the water that the patients were drinking was both limited and both contaminated. So she got sick, she got typhoid, and they both had severe diarrhea and barely survived. So we tell that kind of human story to say that this water issue is a global issue, but it's not some abstraction. It's not something dreamed up by experts in laboratories and so on, but here is an example in Africa. Here's an example in Lima, Peru. Here's something we can tell you about in Shanghai. Around the world, people are experiencing different aspects of the world water crisis.
So water is the leading theme in your coverage of environmental and development issues.
Yes.
If I understand correctly.
We think that water is certainly a link to all aspects of the environment, and I would like to say it's one of the most important issues. It's difficult to rank the issues in the environment because water, of course, is so critical to survival. You can go for days and days without food, but you can't go for days and days without water. And so.
Yes, and being here in Budapest, where along this beautiful Danube River, and in view of some of the conversations and some of the presentation today about the interregional cooperation, that are trying to take place. Do you have any examples of similar cooperations in some of the countries that you've been covering, some of the regions you've been covering?
We're always looking for that kind of cooperation, and my title is the Knight Chair for Cross-Cultural Communication. So it's precisely that thing that we look for. And I think the work along the Danube is a very good example. tomorrow from the Academy of Science here in Hungary, we're going to hear more about the quality of the water in the Danube. And I was working on a story about the Danube a few months ago, and I made a trip between Vienna and Bratislava. And it seems that that stretch of the river is quite clean. In fact, the captain of the boat I was on boasted that the water was so clean he could drink it straight from the river. But I get the impression that it's not that way in many spots along the banks. In fact, I was in Zagreb 2 years ago, and there it was a terrible condition with the quality of the water, the same Danube River. You know, the river is rather long. It's a very beautiful and important economic factor for many countries. And I'm looking forward to hear what the Academy has to tell us about how that cooperation has worked out.
Are you also concerned with the effect of oil spills and all the water pollutions in general? Like we were told this afternoon about that Baltic Sea, and the last pictures that were shown was about cooperation between the various areas in Europe, like the Brittany, for instance, the Black Sea or the Mediterranean. And are you also concerned with that aspect of another type of seawater, let's say, and also all that, with the desalination plants?
Well, I think we've all were stunned at the oil spill in the Gulf, and it really riveted worldwide attention as they tried to deal with that problem, and finally we were able to stop it. But a lot of oil got into a lot of places where no one wanted it to be. That heightens your interest and concern, just the way the recent and ongoing tragedy in Japan has drawn attention to the idea of nuclear power. Mm-hmm. So.
Was that really the first time that it happened in the U.S. on such a big scale?
Well, I think that if my understanding is that oil spill in the Gulf, or that problem with the oil well, was the biggest oil contamination of any body of water anywhere in the world. Mm-hmm. So I think it compares with a tanker case that we had in Alaska maybe 10 or 20 years ago. Mm-hmm. But this kind of tragedy in the Gulf of Mexico draws our attention to the dangers of transporting oil and drilling for oil, and just as the nuclear power plant problem in Japan draws attention to the negative side of producing what otherwise is thought of as kind of clean energy. How big a risk can we take? And on the one hand, you have not clean energy, the oil. On the other hand, you have nuclear power, which is producing without a carbon footprint. And both of them, though, give us great concerns. How can we think about nuclear power as a solution to our electricity needs if it's going to put people's lives at risk?
Mm-hmm. Do you believe in those stress tests that they want to try to implement?
I believe that we should be evolving very strong security measures to prevent disasters at nuclear plants. I think that perhaps the industry would object to them as an additional cost. That cost will be passed on to all of us as customers of the power plants. But I personally would be happy to pay any price, practically, to make sure that I and my neighbors are not radioactive. Mm.
Do you think there is a great future for renewable energies in the U.S.?
Well, I think we all hope that there is. I've been talking to people about wind farms. There's not a the high percentage of the energy is not produced in a renewable way at the moment, but there are some people who think there's great promise in energy through wind. Of course, we have the people who protest that the propellers make too much noise, and that they upset a natural landscape, so that you have equipment and machinery on sea coasts and in fields, That's unpleasant to some people. And then, of course, the startup costs for wind energy is enormous. And the experience I think people are finding is that while it's a very efficient way to produce energy, in the early stages, the energy actually costs the consumer more than other alternatives because the investment required to develop those devices, those propellers and so on, is pretty high.
Mm-hmm. Coming back to the question of water, what are your views on the water as being the water services being run by public services rather than private companies?
Yeah.
Is that an issue
Sure.
in your country?
Yeah, there's a worldwide debate over to what degree corporations should be involved in providing clean drinking water. If it becomes a business, the fear is that some people would be priced out of the market. Some poor people wouldn't be able to get water from a corporate source. They would, the theory is, be able to get water, if it were available, more likely from municipal sources. The reality is that the municipalities and the state governments around the world, in many cases, are doing a terrible job about getting water to their people. Every day we have 4,000 or 5,000 people dying because they drank contaminated water. The water isn't clean. That adds up to about 2 million people a year who are consistently dying because they get poor water. Mm-hmm. Now, we need someone to come in and provide clean water. Now, many governments don't put a high priority on that. One way to solve the problem is to contract the work out, put it in the hands of a corporation. It's very important that the corporation not be permitted to raise prices in a way that it doesn't work for all people. But I have been discussing the theory that a corporation that is permitted to provide water services by a particular government might be required by that government to sell its water at a graduated in a graduated way, so that some people would get water for free. The poorest people would get it for free. And as your income rose, you would pay proportionally more for the water. And in the end, no one would pay an exorbitant amount for the water. But the thing that I'd like to do and advocate is protecting poor people from not having adequate water. As it is now, poor people don't have adequate water, and when they do have water, it's often not safe to drink. That's why we have thousands of people dying every day and a couple of million a year. So I don't think that it's just simply a reflex that the corporate world can't make a contribution here. I think it takes some careful thinking on the part of corporations and governments and probably non-governmental organizations to think, what is the proper role for a corporation in this situation? What services can they provide? And can they do it more effectively than the municipalities? It's possible that the answer would be yes, because we have so much evidence that governments don't place high enough priority on water, clean water.
Yeah. Well, in some instances, we also have evidence that big companies are not doing a very good job of it. And then in terms of water ownership, for instance, for indigenous populations in some country, let's say there are examples in South America, for instance, those indigenous populations are they own the wells, they own the springs, for generations, and they can't see why they can't, they cannot exploit it themselves.
Well, that's
properly.
exactly my point. That's exactly what I'm talking about. If you're going to have a corporation be involved in the process, the corporation needs to have some limits set on how it can operate. You shouldn't have people in Cochabamba, Bolivia, which is one of the areas where there's been a lot of debate over corporate and private and public water. You shouldn't have people in Cochabamba watching the water truck pass their house and not being able to get the water from the truck because they haven't got the money because it's too expensive. And as you said, the water might be coming out of a well that was a public good. Everyone had access to it at one point. Probably there is certainly the case in other places. The public well is often contaminated. So you might have a public well, but if you drink the water, you're going to get sick. So we've had many examples now of where corporations have been involved with providing water in ways that we all find we're critical of, that they don't seem to be fair. They seem to be more business and market oriented than people oriented. So I'm simply saying, if you know, it's the role of government to try to protect people and to try to make communities function, to help and not interfere. So if the government if you accept that a government has a certain paternal role, let us invite some people from corporations in and set the terms and make sure that the corporation doesn't have a free hand to do something that's harmful to some people. The corporation's side of this coin is that they invest money, they have shareholders, and they need to show a return. Well, I understand that, but I also understand that there's got to be a way to get clean, safe drinking water to masses and masses of poor people. We've got to get out of this situation where several thousand people, day in and day out, are dying because of unclean water. You don't see that very much because the people die in remote places. They die quietly. It's not a very spectacular story to be telling because it's a little person here, a little person there. But in fact, when you count them up every year, we end up with 2 million people.
They're catching some infectious disease.
Well, they get various kinds of bacteria, parasites, and viruses, which cause them to have upset stomachs and therefore discharge the waste in a sometimes a violent way. They become very dehydrated, and while we have ways to rehydrate people, not everyone is reached, and so you have people dying of dehydration. Cholera is a very good example of the most extreme form of this kind of sickness, but and there people simply die kind of shriveled up and dried out. It's less dramatic what's happening on a larger scale. Maybe 120,000 people a year die all over the world from cholera, but 2 million die from ordinary forms of contaminated food, contaminated water, and this is something we can deal with. This is a public health issue that can be solved. Many people are working at it. As it is, the work is not having the best effect it could. We are not solving the problem.
Is there a last message that you like to put across to European audience?
I think we all recognize that we live on this planet and the environment is the planet, and we are all thinking of ways that we can be thoughtful and protective of the resources we have. I'm very impressed as I travel around Europe at the European attitude toward this issue. I'm going to be taking a group of students to Stockholm in a few weeks, and the reason we're going to Stockholm is because it was designated by the European Union as the greenest capital city in Europe. And from my perspective, Europe is already significantly ahead in attitude and in many cases implementation ahead of the United States. But when you get to Stockholm, then you're ahead of even Europe, other parts of Europe. Of course, Stockholm is Europe. And so I think it's important for the students at the University of Miami, where I'm professor, and my own specific students, all of them and everyone on this planet, to inform themselves about what is happening with the environment. I happen to work with journalism students, and those students, as they go out in careers in sports, in government, in foreign affairs, wherever they are working, they are going to be confronting environmental issues. And so it's a subject that demands our attention, and I'm impressed with the way it's happening in Europe, and I'm impressed that there is momentum in the United States toward really embracing the issue.
Well, we've been impressed with and also sharing this experience with your students on this video conference.
Thank you very much.
Thank you very much for organizing it. Thank you very much for Professor Treaster. It was a pleasure meeting you.
Thank you. My pleasure.
Yeah.